Our talk for today is called Where Are the Dead? Or Rosicrucian Eschatology. Eschatology means the study of final things, usually death. And so what we're going to do is going to talk about death. I enjoy making the titles. I've always wanted to name something like a racehorse or like a cultivar of flower or something like that. But I've never had the chance to do that. In fact, all of the creativity for today's talk went into the title. It's going to be a very unoriginal talk. And the titles help. They really help because they can be a very practical thing. If you go into the office and people ask you, well, what did you do over the week? Well, if you say, I listened to a talk about death or from a spiritual point of view, they start hearing superstition and all of that sort of thing. But if you say, well, I attended a talk on eschatology, people will, maybe there's something to all of this. And that gets you the first hearing. And after the first hearing, what you say has to stand, or otherwise you won't have anything with anyone. For years and years, I have been interested in the part of the Bible that deals with what is called the fall of humanity. I find it fascinating, and I have spent many, many hours thinking on it and a lot of hours talking about it. In fact, the entire of this year at home, I'm giving a series of talks on myths on the origin of evil because I want to talk about goodness. And goodness always makes sense, but evil never makes sense. It's utterly stupid. But somehow by going into looking at how that stupidity could have happened in the first place is a good way to begin to get at what makes goodnesses. In the passages of Genesis that talk about the fall of humanity, Jehovah pronounces what appear to be curses or imprecations or something like that. Some are to the serpent, some are to Adam, and some are to Eve, and then some of the curses are given to both of them. Now, clearly, the idea of God in any of the three attributes, cursing, is philosophically and spiritually repugnant. I can't believe in any sense that God would curse. However, if we look at what is said in that passage of the Bible, they really aren't curses at all. But they are restatements of what has just happened and what are going to be the ensuing consequences out of what has just happened. The total emphasis is on meaning and connection between what has been done and what will come out of it. Just what you'd expect, because they had eaten the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and that means they now had to be addressed in terms of knowledge. And so one would expect that they would be addressed in terms of factuality, meaning, causal connection, all of those kinds of things. Most of the content of what are called curses, but are just statements of fact, is pretty expectable. But some of it is a little bit ironic or paradoxical. On one hand, the serpent promised them that if they ate of the fruit, that their eyes would be opened. And so they ate of the fruit, and their eyes were opened, and they didn't like what they saw, so they covered it up. In fact, the result of coming deeper into matter, so deep that we closed off a lot of our inner consciousness, that in itself is a great cover-up. The serpent promised them immortality and the power of the gods, in that by taking use of the generative force, they could willfully create or procreate and keep the species going. However, because this force was used selfishly, and in that selfishness it was used out of harmony with the divine plan and with the cycles that go on, the result is that we put all of our consciousness into selfish desire. And we were manifesting an insecurity about material things. And we were manifesting a disbelief about whether we were going to be taken care of. And as a result, we already had immortality. From the very beginning, we are immortal, but when we came into the body, we lost the vision of the divine, and we became locked into the material realms. And blindness came out of this. That's really what being banished from the Garden of Eden means. The Garden of Eden is the inner spiritual worlds, especially the etheric consciousness. The 4 rivers or the 4 streams that flow into the Garden of Eden are the etheric flows through which light and experience flow into the garden where things are experienced. But when we became so enmeshed and in love with matter, we refocused and we lost contact with the Garden of Eden. And since we acted out of harmony, and we were now in a place of much greater ignorance than we were before, we couldn't do anything harmoniously anymore. And this is where the statement comes, there is the promise of redemption, but you've got to earn it by the sweat of your brow, which means that as long as we did things in the Spirit, the whole principle of the Spirit is ease. As Christ says it, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That is to say, as long as we live in harmony with the Spirit that is behind the entirety of the cosmos, then things are easy. But like Paul says, it's hard to go against the grain. It's hard to kick against the pricks. It's, when you go into the material world and go against things in obedience and you want to do your own thing rather than harmonizing with the whole that is going on, it's going to be more than the sweat of your brow. It's going to be painful. Geez, I almost sound like a minister today. But one of the consequences is, even though we were promised immortality, when we came to identify ourselves with the physical body and lost consciousness of our immortal spirit, in our ignorance, we were shut off from the Spirit, and the Spirit would constantly feed us from within. But when we became separated, we became ignorant, and we became insecure. And even though we guaranteed that we were in charge of perpetuating the species, in our insecurity and identification with the body, we began to fear death. And in the fearing of death, since we had eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we then had to find our own way. We had to knowledgeably reconcile ourselves with death and what happens after death, or what is meant by the whole phenomenon of death. And over hundreds of thousands of years, this whole thing of thinking and experiencing death and its meanings has resulted in what is called eschatology, which is the study of final things. Now, there have been a lot of different views in the world. I'll just give you some right now, some very different from each other. Socrates said, "Why should I fear death when I have sought it all my life as the proving of my philosophy and as the proving of my life?" On the other hand, Carlos Castaneda, speaking using the voice of Don Juan Matos, says, "Remember, death is always looking over your left shoulder. Live in that knowledge." Christ Jesus has something very paradoxical to say about death. "He who loses his life shall save it, but he who saves it shall lose it." Very paradoxical. So on one hand, one of these voices said it was a benevolent friend. Another said that it was a demanding taskmaster. And another had a very paradoxical idea about love and selfishness, or sacrifice and let me look out for my own. They all have a sense of urgency about them, but they deviate quite a bit. There are a lot of different sciences of death. I've looked into quite a few of them: Egyptian, Homeric, and other Greek notions, Chinese, Native American, and they're very varied from each other. There is some commonality, and you can find the spiritual truths if you dig deeply into them and get behind the surface, but they're very different. The Rosicrucian philosophy has a number of explanations why the different views of death are different. There is a whole process to something that is new to us, that we go through various stages. Every time somebody around us dies, we go through a whole number of stages. A number of years back at the University of California in Berkeley, there was a class on the psychology of change, something like that. And one man came to the class. It wasn't arranged with the professor, but one man came to class in a bag. And every time the class met, he came and he was in a bag. And the first thing that happened is people didn't want to admit that it was there. There was denial. Then there was outrage. Why is this person messing up our class by coming in a bag? After that, there was curiosity. And people started to theorize about the guy in the bag. And eventually, they had an affection toward the man. And so we, in ourselves, all of the spirals that we go through in terms of evolution are not merely physical. There are spirals and cycles that we go through that are psychological, that we go through one stage after another stage after another stage. The Rosicrucian philosophy also says we couldn't know a lot about after-death states because of our limitations. And therefore, different philosophies are given to people according to their limitations. It's exactly the way Duke Ellington wrote music. I heard an interview with Duke Ellington where he said, "I don't have the privilege that the symphony conductors have. They have a whole big orchestra with almost perfect musicians and 20 or 30 that would like to step in if one person couldn't be there." he had unlimited, highly perfected talent. Duke Ellington said, well, I may have a man that in the trombone is only good in a certain range. And so when I write music, I have to write according to the limitations. And that is why a lot of philosophies have been given to people, is because of their limitations. While we're on Duke Ellington, do you know that in the catalog of compositions, it isn't Bach, it isn't Beethoven, and it isn't Mozart that has the most contributions to the catalog? It's Duke Ellington. He has the largest number and probably the greatest variety of kinds of music that he has contributed. Another reason for all of this is that culturally, the angels or the archangels that have been cultural or racial spirits to us have brought us certain specific lessons because we needed those, and we had to go through a whole rainbow of experiences. The spiritual worlds themselves change. Before the incarnation of Christ into the body of Jesus, it is, or it was, just like the ancients reported it. Like Homer and Virgil, when they reported what it was like in the after-death states, they said it was a dark and dreary place. But after the Christ came and brought a new light to everything, the inner worlds were much, much brighter surrounding the earth. So things change. And as a consequence, the science of death or the understanding of death must also change. So now we'll begin to gradually work our way into some of the ideas of the Rosicrucian philosophy about what happens at death and afterwards. So if we ask a simple question that we did just a moment ago of Socrates and Don Juan Matos and of Christ Jesus, is death benign? Is it malevolent? Or is it paradoxical? The Rosicrucian philosophy would have two answers. The first answer would be none of the above. That is, it's just a transition. There is a continuum. There is one life. It goes on and on and on. It is eternal. But there are different stages in it. And death is not much different from one point of view than walking out this door. That it's just going from one stage to another. The other answer that the Rosicrucian philosophy would give is that it certainly is benign, because it represents progress. It represents a change. Moreover, it represents a relief. A relief because we get progressively more and more limited. And it represents an opportunity to learn everything from the past and start all over. You know, sometimes things go awry. You know, if you're practicing music, you know, you're rehearsing together, you can do things, and sometimes things start to break down again, and suddenly the leader says, all right, from the top, we have to go all the way back from the beginning and start all over again. If this is true, why should we study death? The Rosicrucian philosophy says that experientially, and I've seen it in my own life, as we progress through life, we let go of more and more of our indulgences. And we make mistakes, and we try to find why we did, and we try to understand the meaning of things, because a lot of things happen in life that we don't understand the meaning of. So more and more we think less about the externals and less about the pleasurable experiences, and the more we turn inward to seek meaning. When we do that, more and more we sense a belonging inwardly to something. We're part of an ongoing stream, and it's something that we really feel part of. As one gets older, one automatically becomes more religious because one sees maybe not all of the connections, but one sees that there really is a meaning behind things. And when that happens, one becomes much more faithful. One would never give up faith as far as participating in that meaning, Dr. Kevorkian notwithstanding. That, there may be an internal death wish that's built into every one of ourselves, but there is a life that we belong to. And it is a very purposeful life, and as long as we are here, even if we are comatose, we have something that we are offering, and we have something that we are experiencing. But at the same time that we seek inner meaning and that we become unified and merge with the purpose of life, we become more accepting. A young person is always proud about what they can do and that they think they can change anything. A young person believes they can do anything and they can do everything. A person who's been around longer realizes you can't do everything and you got to choose the things that are more important. And maybe someday we'll be able to do anything, but right now we may not be able to do anything. There is an acceptance of inevitables. And in that acceptance of inevitables, as one gets older, one realizes that death is inevitable. Young people don't believe they're going to die, ever. Because they're coming in. They're fresh. They're strong. It's a great joy to see young people. But after a while, you know you're going to die. And you reconcile yourself to that. And what happens as one gets older and is more calcified and is more limited, one learns greater efficiency. And so one says to oneself, I'm going to get the most out of this that I can. And therefore, if I have to die, I'm going to die in such a way that I'm going to get the most out of it. And in that way, it is in that spirit that the Rosicrucian philosophy sees not only a life as an evolution, but everything that we're participating in is an evolutionary creation. It's a creation, but within it there is an evolution, and that the more we can understand the meaning and purpose behind it, the better we can do with it. So, the Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that it's very wise to study death and what happens after death and to know why it is there so we can efficiently work with it. Let's continue on as we did last week when we looked at the different spiritual worlds. Let's just look at experiences as we see them first in the physical world, because that will give us the hints that we need, and in doing that we can try them and we can say, is this what happens? Now there is a process that has been studied pretty much in detail. It's called embryology. It's not been studied in detail by material science to the level that it has been studied by spiritual science, where it's been studied down to the one cell level. We'll come back to that in just a little bit. But basically, what we call a life in this world begins as a little wet gel. It's just like a little insignificant gel. But that becomes an embryo and a fetus, and it goes through all kinds of repetitions or recapitulations of earlier stages of evolution. We talked a little bit about that last week, but not much. Sometime we'll talk about it in more detail. But eventually, it emerges as a whole from the womb of the mother that has been generous enough to give it form. It's a whole. It is, it doesn't need anything more. It's not completed yet. It's not finished, but it's a whole. A little baby, the ears are transparent, and the lovely little fingers, man, they're right away from the beginning. It's a complete whole. Of course, when that form returns to us, it's helpless, and it takes an enormous amount of support. But what happens is that it grows, and it begins to support itself more and more, and at first the growth is fast, or it comes in spurts, and then there's a whole period of several years where, wow, the kid just shoots up like a stalk. It grows very fast, very rapidly, and then after a while it stops growing, but it doesn't stop changing. All the way until the very last breath, the form of the body is continuously changing, and there is more and more character the more the person experiences. But also, it becomes harder and harder. Calcification. What starts out as a little gel ends up, like you can't fall when you get really old because your bones become brittle. Even your skin, it seems harder than the bones of a baby. Everything gets harder and harder until finally, after the last breath, it becomes rigor mortis, and that form is stiff. Until the bacteria get a hold of it and they soften it up again, but then it goes back to the macrocosm. Now that's the form side. On the life side, on the side of consciousness, what happens is something very different. At first, the body or the baby or the infant is all in its body, and that's all it cares about, and it's terribly uncomfortable. But gradually, it becomes more and more outward. There are more things that little infant wants to touch and more places that it wants to go, and it's always looking forward. You look forward to when you're going to be bigger. You look forward to when you're going to be able to go to school. You look forward to when you're going to be able to drive a car. You look forward to your first date. Everything is looking forward until some events happen. And the normal event that changes it all is when you have children. And suddenly, when you have children, you start to look backward. And so the first third of life, roughly speaking, everything is only forward-looking. In the second third of life, there are all kinds of ways that this can be tied together astrologically, but that would be a 2-hour talk all in itself alone, because the astrology of it is absolutely beautiful. But in the second third of life, your growing up is done. You now take your responsibilities. You still have things that you look forward to. I'm going to own my own home, or I'm going to be able to do this in my career, or I'm going to be able to travel or do something like that. But at the same time, you're looking back and you're watching your kids as they go through the stages that you went through. Then come some other significant events. Number one, your parents die. And when the generation above you or before you dies, you're the most advanced. You have nobody to look forward to. Nobody. You're now the elder generation. And you have grandchildren. And when you have grandchildren, any grandparent can tell you, you watch your kids as they watch their kids. And grandparents are very different about upbringing because they realize they daren't interfere in the way their kids are dealing with the grandchildren. And so what happens is you have that once removed view. Ultimately, it comes to the point that you have nothing to look forward to but death. You're only looking back. You're double looking back until eventually the moment comes and the body dies and everything is all changed. Now, what we're looking at here is a cycle. A lot of life, everything in life is a cycle. Because there are some things that we have to learn by repetition. In the metabolism of our cells, there's the Krebs cycle that goes on, I think, in milliseconds. That there is a repeat of the metabolic process several times a second. It's a very fast cycle. It's triggered off by the metabolic functions of the liver, but it's called a Krebs cycle. Krebs, K-R-E-B-S. Discovered by a doctor or a biologist called Krebs, K-R-E-B. On the other hand, there are cycles that last millions of years. So there are some things that we learn over again and again. There are some things with the progress of time that tomorrow becomes today, becomes yesterday. There is also a linear progress. We do improve. We do get better. And it's really a joyous thing, you know, that you don't make those same dumb mistakes over again and again and again. You do learn. And put together, the whole experience is both a line or a delineation and a cycle so that it becomes a spiral that folds back on itself. Now, the reason I went into that is we've been talking about cycles and movements. Yesterday, we said that when the vortices in the desire body turn one way, the person is passive or negative and drawing inward involuntarily in clairvoyance. When the cycle or the spiral turns the other way, someone is outward. Someone is actively perceiving things and giving of themselves to the process of perception, desire world perception. So there are two kinds of spinning. One kind of spinning is involved in involution into matter. One is involved in evolution out of matter. You can try it for yourself. You can still find some of the old merry-go-rounds. If you sit on that merry-go-round and spin it one way, it's different than if you spin it the other way. When you spin one way, you'll find yourself getting dizzier than the other way. And the people who make those little motors that they have that just so many turns a minute that they want to put people into self-hypnotic trances. I don't know why anybody would want to go into self-hypnotic trance. I want to be more awake. I don't want to be more asleep. But they always turn them one way. In fact, if you start turning your body around one way, you'll find that you get dizzier easier than if you go the other way. And what happens when a hypnotist is trying to bring somebody back into the body? They count forward. But when they're trying to take them out of the body, they count backwards. And to quote Jean-Francois, who gave, I understand, a very lovely talk last evening, when we do our retrospection or looking backward over the day, he says that's better than melatonin. it'll put you to sleep quicker than anything else. So one kind of spinning turns us the kind of thinking where we plan ahead and that where we try to map out the future. That kind of spinning takes us deeper into matter. On the other hand, memory or thinking backwards takes us out of matter. Very important principle. So there is a function, and this function runs throughout the whole world. You'll find, for example, people that feel unfulfilled in the world, and they feel like they've never done enough in the day. They'll never let go. And they're planning for what they're going to do the next day. And that's what makes a somnambulist. My little sister was a somnambulist. She could never went to bed thinking that she had done enough, and she was always reliving the events of the day and trying to relive them forward all over again. And she would talk in her sleep. She wouldn't too much get up and walk around, but it's not wise to go to sleep planning what you're going to do tomorrow, because you're not going to let go of the body right. You're going to hang on to the body, and you're going to be half asleep and half awake. If you are too much thinking about tomorrow, when the sun sets, it's time to think back and look the other direction. So, what is taking place is this same process in everything from us coming in and out of our bodies every day, is the same principle as God coming into the cosmos. It's like a prayer. You spiral deeper into a prayer, and then you come out, and then you go back deeper in again, and then you come out, and you go deeper yet, and then finally you start backing out. You might say that the physical world that we live in right now is, from our point of view, the extent of God's concentration. The dream of God, the ability to go that deep into the cosmos and hold that concentration. Literally, we're living in the concentration of God. It's been solidified that much. Eventually, whether it's a prayer or whether it is a given life, we exhaust the will that sustains that concentration. Eventually, we exhaust the will to live. And when we do that, we start letting go. And death sets in. So let's just look at what happens according to the Rosicrucian philosophy in a very gentle way. Let's look at what happens at death. All of the involution into matter, all of the forward-looking, all of the material hardening process ends. However, that looking back that began when we started having children, that now takes over completely. It's unimpeded by the will to come into matter. And everything starts unwinding. And with that unwinding is disintegration. And it is, in a way, a decay. Instead of thinking forward, we rethink. That is, we remember. Everything that has been done before, we now remember. And we extract out of the memory the essences of what we experience. The more we come into the material world, I get tinier every year. My mother shrank. She had one of those things with the spine that had started collapsing, and she got tinier and tinier every year. But the more we go outward into the material worlds, the more we contract. When we leave the body, when our consciousness lets go of the involutionary process, we expand. Same thing happens in our prayers or in our concentrations. First we concentrate deeply and bring things to a point, and then we can't do it anymore, and we let go, and then we expand, and then we get to see the big picture that we developed while making the little point along the way. It's all of that nature. Now, that's in rough what takes place. Let's look at what the Rosicrucian philosophy says in detail takes place at death. But before that, we have to go back to the womb. The Rosicrucian investigators, by using clairvoyance and insight, meaning spiritual sight, have very, very carefully looked at the whole embryological process, down to the individual cell. So, when the sperm meets the egg and there is one pseudocell, the first cell that is differentiated is a heart cell. They say without question, in every incarnation, the first cell in the physical body that is built is a heart cell. What they say beyond that is that the second kind of cell that is differentiated is a pineal cell. That is what will eventually become the pineal gland. Now, the Rosicrucian investigators have a really strange notion. They claim that the endocrine glands, like the pituitary body and the thyroid and the thymus and the suprarenals and such, those glands are not part of the physical body. They're not part of the regular physical organism. What they are is that they are consolidations out of the etheric body. Remember, we've said all along that our physical body is suspended within a body of life. And our physical body doesn't produce our etheric aura. Our etheric aura suspends the physical within it. The etheric body not only builds the physical, but it controls the building process. So what happens is the will to live is centered, from the Rosicrucian point of view, in the heart. And the regulatory process of building a new body is centered, to begin with, in the pituitary body. That the control of the process of consolidating the physical body is done by the pituitary body, by the pineal gland, and by the etheric body working through the endocrines. See, the endocrines only communicate with each other. You take like muscles or anything else in the body, they're innervated by a nerve, or they're stimulated by a nerve. But the endocrine glands only communicate with each other through the etheric flow of the blood. They talk to each other, but they're unaffected by the rest of the systems. They have their own way, and they are very, like, for example, when the pituitary body comes in, the pituitary body truly is the captain of the whole endocrine system, and when it kicks in, the whole process of growth is controlled by the pituitary body. For example, the pituitary body, if there isn't a balance between the different endocrine glands, that is, if there isn't a planetary balance, and the Uranus is exceedingly strong and without control, you'll have something like giantism, because Uranus rules the pituitary body and the whole growth process. But I'm afraid I don't want to get into that, because our timing is pretty good today, and it's awfully hot, and I can see people are suffering from the heat, and I don't want it to go over 90 minutes if I possibly can. Okay. So, what happens then is, let's talk about memory now. So the physical body gets built. And we now have to talk about experience in the body that is remembered. There are two components to memory. That is, something has to be receptive enough to take in an impression, but it has to be resistant enough to hold that impression once it has taken. Like this stuff is not really good for memory, because it takes too much effort to make the impression because the resistance is too strong. It's going to last a long time if you chisel something in stone, but it's an enormous effort to chisel something in stone. Can you imagine the dedication of people when they had to write all of their holy works in stone? I'm going to tell you something now, because this is really interesting to me, that even though in Greece and in Egypt, for example, where they did everything with hieroglyphs and chiseled them in the stone before they made paper, they even then had puns. All of the deepest holy works and creation stories are filled with puns. You know why that is, don't you? Because the pun helps you to see something from another side, from another point of view. And do you know that dirty jokes originated in the mystery schools? Both in Greece and in India, dirty jokes were part of it for a number of reasons. Because there's always an insecurity. You know, one realizes that's a holy force, and one also realizes that we have many lives of desire about that force, and so there's a tension about it. And when you tell a joke about it, it relieves that tension, and then you're relaxed. But on top of that, the double entendre is one of the first ways you understand meanings on different levels. And so you both relax the person so that they're not uptight about the fact of living purely. And then through that same process, they begin to understand something on many levels. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm espousing a doctrine of that it's a great thing to tell naughty jokes or anything like that. But everything has been used for the good in the past. Okay, so the memory then is mostly in the ethers. That is, the Rosicrucian philosophy has the conception that we've said all along, but the pictures flow down through the spiritual worlds and into the ethers, and that's how the form is made. Any given moment, right now, there are many pictures. The pictures of what's happening astrologically, the pictures of what are happening culturally, every thought that you folks are thinking, all of that is in the ethers right now. And as we breathe, we take that in. And that gets impressed on our etheric vehicles. It's altogether different than brain memory. There are times when you'll be doing something like tinkering with something and you're somewhat concentrated but not completely so. And your mind is occupied, but not totally occupied, that you start to float in your body. And sometimes, I had one instance one day I was working with something and botched up everything I was doing. I was sitting there and I wasn't thinking really deeply, but I was working on something. And suddenly I was back in the cornfield, and I was a little child, and I was walking down the corn row toward the elderberry bushes. And I was sort of a melancholy child. And I was in that melancholy mood, and I could feel the rough edges of the corn scraping against my skin. And as the pollen fell off of the tassels, it was itchy and all. And I could live that moment just as I got so distracted by it, I lost what I was doing at the moment. But those are the kinds of pictures that if one is sensitive, one could have even looked in there and saw where the moon was at that moment. Or you can actually almost step into those living pictures. And so every breath that we take, everything that has happened in our life is recorded in us. Now, we come to an extremely hard conception now, and that is the conception of a seed atom. The Rosicrucian seers claim that for each of our bodies, our physical body, our etheric body, our desire body, which is made up of our emotions and desires, and our mind, there is a central atom. They call it an atom. And that atom contains the cooked down experience of all, like for the physical body, of every form we have ever experienced. Even back billions of years ago, when we went through in a much different stage of the evolution, when what the Bible calls the powers, which in the Rosicrucian philosophy is called the lords of the mind, when they were human-like and the universe was no more dense than a thought, when they started forming us like we form snowballs or wax images or paper mache or gold rings or whatever, every experience of form that we have had in a mineral-like state, a plant-like state, a human-like state, every animal-like state, human-like, every form, every impact that we have ever experienced externally is impressed on that atom. The experience of all of that. It represents the core de la core. It's like everything that we have done from the past. It's completely unique to us. Our bodies, we can't make a body different than what our experience has been. And so that if somebody has a metabolism that is different than ours, like they put on weight or they're terribly skinny or something like that, that is a result of what they are doing from all of their experiences of the past. This is something that has an enormously long history, and it's not a good idea to judge about things like this. But this seed atom is located in the left ventricle of the heart. The only part that is never removed in a heart transplant, so far anyway. And this spins along with the will to live. And it is what that seed atom is made of, or where it is located cosmographically, isn't clear from the Rosicrucian philosophy. But because it involves form and life both and the ability to take on memory, it's probably somewhere in the region between, at the chemical ether level. But it spins, and it spins forward, and what the form of our life is going to be, according to the way we thought our life out before we came to birth, that is the way it goes forward. Eventually, our life either gets interrupted or the will to live runs out. And it stops spinning. At this point, that seed atom and all of the others, which are located in various parts of the body, like the liver, the solar plexus, and the frontal sinus, those seed atoms all pass out through what the Bible and the Rosicrucian philosophy call the silver cord, which is an essence made of two spirals of Archimedes, opposite of each other, and as long as they're connected, one can leave the body and come back in and live. But as Solomon says it, once the silver cord has been loosed and the two parts of the spiral snap, then one cannot come back to the body and live anymore. With regard to this, since the will to live is when we have the heart to live, is associated with the seed atom in the heart, in terms of modern medical ethics, the Rosicrucian philosophy comes down definitely on the side of heart death and not on the side of brain death. That the brain may not function, but there is still experience, and that experience is important until there is heart death. On the other hand, the Rosicrucian philosophy says we should not unduly try to keep the body alive. Now, what happens here is the spinning stops. The spiritual self takes all of the seed atoms with it and the etheric body, and it goes into the etheric world. The consciousness is expanded almost to infinity in the etheric world, but the focus of attention is close at hand. What happens at this point is that as the atoms unspin in the etheric world, one sees one's entire life backwards, because it's an unspinning process. It's the same as that principle that's mentioned, and the first shall be last, or he that cometh after me will be preferred before me because he was before me. These are, if you're familiar with, it's a push-down stack. You know the logic in electronics, and it's called a push-down stack. The last are going to be first. You pop things off the top. So we see our entire life backwards. Every picture of everything we've ever done, including things that we'd never guess, our dreams. And if we work as invisible helpers, we'll remember that. Anything because that's in the higher ethers. And the elder brothers transmit to us pictures, living, moving pictures, as lessons on a regular basis. For the most part, they strike in our vital bodies, and we're not conscious of them. They're there. They're affecting us. Sometimes you'll say, wow, I just had this great idea, and then you go talk to somebody else who studies with the Rosicrucian philosophy, and they say, wow, I had the same idea. And it's as if thinking that you had done some great thing, and really what you're doing is reciting back a lesson that you never knew you received in the first place. It's quite a thing. Even thoughts that we had in the subconscious that never surfaced, all of these things, whether we notice them or not, we see all over backwards. Now, yes. 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 Well, they are impregnated into the etheric. The etheric body is where the memory is stored. And as we're, it's sort of like rolling up a motion picture, a film. You roll picture on top of picture on top of picture, only it's a very funny thing. You can get in touch with those pictures, and the way it works is that the pictures of one kind are on top of the pictures of another kind. The roll is such so that if you look down any area, you'll see things associated in a way that the associative memory is there as well as a delineatory memory. Okay. Now, some of you might ask, in light of books like James Moody, Life After Life, why isn't it like things in Life After Life? The main reason is because the people recorded in Life After Life didn't die. There are all kinds of near-death experiences that one can have. And they each are precipitated by the angels of destiny for a particular reason. And if you need to experience something in one way, you'll have a near-death experience of that nature. What we're talking about here is what happens in the natural process of things when things unwind. In fact, some people have near-death experiences that are exactly like this. Most of the things like seeing through a tunnel or something like that and seeing a light at the end, that has to do with the biologists have now indicated that they can measure this. They can see that this is a neurophysiological process, that the consciousness closes out in a certain way, and your consciousness gets pinned in a way. And it really isn't going through a tunnel, but it has that appearance, or it has that type of effect. And what you're experiencing there is something in the body and not something out of the body. This is an extremely, extremely important time. It's an extremely important time, even if we come back to the body. I worked with a man for years. He was an electronics technician, and he would love to have considered me crazy. But when he was a young man, he almost died. He almost died, and at the last moment, they were able to resuscitate him. And he told me one day when we were working behind the computer, he said, I have seen my whole life backward. And he said, it was amazing. He says, things that I never, ever could remember, they were all there. He never said another word again as long as we worked together over the years. But then I'd start talking about spiritual things at work, and he'd like to have thought I was crazy, but he couldn't do it because he was kind of, when you've had that experience like that once, you've been loosened up from your physical, he was sensitive to things on the other side. Our life here is for experience. And we reap an enormous amount of experience here, more than we can realize right now. But it is important that nothing be lost. It is a tremendous waste if we have a rich, full life and that we can't harvest that experience, and because this is literally the way we feed God, is with the experience of our life. Everything in all of our future lives is dependent on what happens at this moment of after death. If we pay attention to the pictures, and if we are able to look into those pictures and draw out all of the memory, that is very, very important. If we don't pay attention, the impression of the pictures will not be strong, and our life will have, to some extent, been wasted. So what the Rosicrucian philosophy says, first of all, is after you die, you try to keep the body from decaying. You keep it cold. And you put it in some place like a morgue. And you leave it that way for 3.5 days, 72 hours, approximately. And what you do is you do not disrupt the body. No autopsies, no embalming, because there still is a resonant or a sympathetic vibration. And the spirit can still, by induction, feel what is going on in the physical body. This rules out organ transplants, because organ transplanting is a savaging of the body. Man, they go through there, and in 3 minutes' time, your body is cleaned out. The organs are taken out. I'm not so keen on organ transplanting anyway, because to me it is a materialistic notion. It's as though we're machines, and you can take a gear out of one machine and put it in another machine. Our bodies are temples, and they are living organisms of a divine being. And to think that we're interchangeable down to the level of livers or hearts or things like that, I don't want to live by organ transplant. It's the quality of the way we live, and not necessarily how long we live. And we produce this is not an official Rosicrucian statement. The Rosicrucian philosophy does not have an official statement about organ transplanting, but I'm just giving you my personal opinion that it is a materialistic notion that the body is like a machine, and that it is all physical. Yes, sir.
There is a pamphlet that the fellowship puts out.
Oh, there is one now. Okay. All right.
And it talks specifically about heart transplants, and the fact that the seed atom is contained in the heart, and how you don't want to split the heart for that reason. Personally, I had a friend who had cancer. She used to get these medical journals from the American Medical Association. I read a few of them, and one issue dealt with organ transplants, livers, and things like that. And there have been medical situations where recipients of these transplants have complained, or at least reported, having foreign experiences.
Yes. Yep.
Esoterically, obviously, they receive seed atoms of another person, and then suddenly are having glimpses into the donor's life.
Thank you very much. Excellent contribution. Wow. All right. So you don't want to disturb the body in any way. Even the environment. You don't want the body to be around where there's all kinds of noise. Anything that would distract the attention. This goes even so far as what you think and what you emote. Like if you have all kinds of feelings of grief that are so intense, that can distract the entity that is going through this experience. And the best thing is, let the dead bury the dead, as Christ said in one way. Just let them be. There'll be a time later on when they're doing the other work where your thoughts and feelings will interact with them, because it will help to give them closure on some of their desire things as they rot those away. But it is a very important time. It's a time that you really have to practice self-control and not do any distraction, physical or psychological. Now, yes?
A question, like in the Flight 800, where a lot of people died on impact and were incinerated.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that in a little bit. They're going to lose everything.
Okay.
Well, there is something that there are occasions where the information is lost, but there are attempts to make it up to the individual. You can't make up the exact experience, but what you can make up to them is what they needed to have gained from that experience. And I'll mention that a little bit. I'm starting to run along again, and I would like one of these to be, the first one was on time. All right. The length of the remembrance, according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, can be anywhere up to 3.5 days, and it depends on a number of things. It depends on how long the life was in the first place, how much there is to look at. The second thing it depends on is the attention span. Anybody can whip through a picture very fast, but show me somebody that can hold an image long and have the metamorphosis of that image be very slow, and you will have somebody that has my respect. So the attention span, the ability to slow things down, not just have everything go whipping by you, is important, because however your attention is going to be is how things are going to sink in. The third thing that it is dependent on is the strength of the etheric body. What happens is that everything gets adjusted according to those three factors. So if you have a very short attention span, or if the etheric body is weak and you couldn't stay awake, force yourself to stay awake for 3.5 days. If you didn't have that kind of ability when you were alive, it'll happen in a short number of time, maybe 6 or 8 hours. But everything will be gotten in, but it'll just go at a faster rate. If I imagine that this could be brought down almost to T0, where you would see everything instantaneously. But in spiritual things, very often, slow is fast and fast is slow. People who try to speed through things get themselves in all kinds of trouble. But if you're very slow, if you're very sure and stay with things, your growth is much, much faster than if you make lurch efforts. All right. Now, the effects of this on the etheric body are threefold. Number one, it stratifies the etheric body. And that means, when we talk about geological strata, the use of the word here is that the biological ethers get separated from the soul ethers. That is, the ethers that are responsible for sense perception and the ability to activate energy, such as to circulate the blood, for example, and the ability to think and remember, they get separated from the biological part, and they go along into these spiritual worlds in between lives. A second effect is that the effects from both the etheric body, or the experiences from both the etheric body and the physical body, are built into the etheric and physical seed atoms to be used in all future lives. And finally, the third is that the etheric and physical form is built right into the desire body in the region of impressionability. If you were here last week when we talked about the different worlds and the different bodies, we said that in the region of impressionability, the forces of attraction and repulsion were equally balanced, so that an impression could be held. And so the form of the desire body is maintained in that way. So our whole existence after that is as an impression. Oh boy. What happens next is that the desire body begins to rot. When I say rot, I say that on purpose. There are some things, I'm not a seer, so I can't give you the answers on that, but God is very generous in sharing. That everything that gets built, even our digestion or plants, when that gets built through the ethers, there are fairies that do the building. And there are another set of fairies, there's a whole kingdom of beings that are associated with destruction. That there are, when there's, stinky rot going on, there's another kind of entity that is there. No experience is wasted on just one being alone. So I don't know, but the desire body starts rotting. I assume that there are desire entities that are taking place in that kind of decomposition also. But we don't think about it as rotting like bacterial rotting in the physical world, but it is a breaking down. Now what happens is hardness. In the same way that the physical body has hardness from calcification, the desire body has its own kind of hardness. Anytime we indulge ourselves in a desire, we become psychologically harder. And it isn't just our personal pleasures that hardens us. If we indulge ourselves, that is egoistically pleasure ourselves, even in doing something good. There are a lot of people that take a great deal of pride and they indulge themselves in doing good things only for their own feeling good about it. That hardens. So when we say that is a hard man, or like a blues singer says, she was a hard-hearted woman, there is that psychological kind of hardness. There are three agencies in the cosmos that soften hardness. One happens very, very rarely when we have an influx of love from the life spirit, when we have a moment of grace and everything is made all new again. That is one of the softening agencies. Another one is pain. Provided a person doesn't use the pain to set themselves against pain, pain is psychologically softening. Show me a very hard human being that has gone through extreme pain, and I'll show you a human being that has become psychologically softer, more caring, more loving. This is one of, people like to think of pain as only an avoidance mechanism. But pain is something more than to just keep us away from burning ourselves in the fire. Pain is something that has the effect of softening us psychologically. The third thing is to unwind all of the stuff that we have bound up in the desire body. Most of our experiences are like traumatic experiences. We hang on to them too much. Like some people, the ancient peoples used to see monsters surrounding a person. Inside of those monsters are what the psychiatrists would call complexes. And those are because the way we think and the way we desire, we bind those up and make living creatures out of them that spring back at us in our consciousness. But when we unwind them, when we rock them, when we break them down, that is the purpose of what happens in the desire world. Now, the process can take a long or short time depending on an individual. Max Heindel relates to circumstance where one probationer had retrospected life so thoroughly that they didn't even have to go through the desire world experience. They were completely clean. They just let go and they went right on into the spiritual worlds. Someone, I believe it was Emanuel Swedenborg, describes, I think it was John Calvin, in the lower desire world. His purgatorial existence was enormously long. Enormously long. You know why? He wouldn't admit that he was dead. He said, I can't be dead. I know, in his very fundamentalistic way, he says, I know what it's like when you die, and this isn't it. And he wouldn't let go, and he wouldn't let go, and he wouldn't let go. And so he stayed, I think, for something like centuries in the lower desire world because he wouldn't admit to the reality of it.
Was he dead?
What?
Was he dead?
We're all alive, I guess. The factors that determine how long we stay in the desire world are how open we are to being repentant. If we admit and really feel what we did, it happens quickly. Also, the grade of our desire bodies. If we have a lot of repulsive desires, they may take longer. Also, for people that get involved, there are people that actually practice means in their evil. They practice means to hate more strongly. And in some cases, they can produce desire bodies that are not only terribly malignant, but that they become so hardened that it takes centuries for them to break down. And so in some cases, at least Mr. Heindel says so, that they have to be pulled out of the desire body and they're taken through the rest of the experience, and the desire body still is there when they come back to birth, and it haunts them. It's like some people who have very split personalities are of that nature. And obviously, the length depends on how good the pictures are. If the pictures are impressed really well and we have very clear experience of what we have done, it's going to get over quicker. You're going to know better. Now, one peculiarity of the Rosicrucian philosophy is that it gives different names to the same place. That is, the lower desire world, we called one thing last week when we were talking about cosmography. In the process of after death, when things are unwinding, it's called purgatory. Now, you might think that this is confusing, why it is given one name at one time and another name at another time. It's not meant to confuse you. It is meant to make things simpler. Because if you're trying in your consciousness to get to a region of experience, if you can intersect, if you can know what region of the desire world, that is how repulsive it is or how attractive it is, that is how much somebody is giving in love or how much somebody's trying to pull it to them and like a dog with a bone and growl and drive everyone away. If you understand how much repulsion and attraction there is, and you understand that someone is unwinding, it's easier to focus. It's just like triangulation, or it's like finding a place on the map. And so it makes things a lot clearer. And so this region is called, we'll follow the tradition. And the tradition is that one always enters the desire world in the placid center. That is where one can just feel what is in the desire world, the region of feeling. This region is called the borderland in Rosicrucian philosophy. And it is for people who weren't really interested in things. They didn't feel things. We have a choice of being interested or not being interested. In one of the early talks, we talked about making ourselves vulnerable. Yesterday, we talked about making ourselves controlledly vulnerable. We don't open our eyes to a welding torch or something like that. We're in control of how vulnerable we make ourselves. But some people, they're fine people, You hear about them all the time in Ann Landers. Usually women will write in and say, my husband is a fine man, but he doesn't have many feelings at all. You know what I'm saying? It's that sort of thing. Now what happens is, we said last week when we were talking about the spiritual worlds, the more one goes inward, the more one is approaching the spirit, and spirit is more in the direction of the potential called time. Yesterday we said that when you're moving really fast, it seems like you have an enormous amount of time and everything goes in slow motion when your consciousness is extremely sped up. So what happens to someone in the desire world who does not have any interests, but yet there is this enormous potential of time? Something worse than boredom, worse than ennui. It's like time just drags on and on and on, and there's all sorts of potential things that could be experienced, but because the person was indifferent to life, indifferent to what went on around them, even urgent feelings around them, there's a lot of people suffering. There's a lot of people suffering. And if you're indifferent, it's a high price you have to pay, because it seems like you're waiting forever and ever and ever, and nothing happens. On the other hand, if you did take interest, but that your interest was self-assertive, you then have a lot of repulsive desires. And the repulsive desires are the regions where there is repulsion and not just pure attraction, where there is assertion and not love that holds things together. Those regions are called purgatory. Unfortunately, that's a loaded term for a lot of people who went through a Catholic experience. They have a lot of difficult things about it. Everything that happens in the unwinding process in the desire world, whether it is in the region of feeling or whether it is in purgatory, is not punishment. Punishment is something that has been thought up by humans. There is not a punishment. Punishment is a human notion. It's just another name for vengeance. When you experience something in the desire world, it is you that are experiencing your own self, just from a different perspective. Punishment, sometimes people get involved with punishment, and that's vengeance, and they want to mete it out to people just to cause them pain. Not for a reasonable pain, but just to give them pain because they think they deserve it. And they'll dish out much more than the person ever dished out in the first place. That's an impossibility in nature. What we're talking about here is a natural function. You can try to punish yourself if you want to, and some of us do that. We try to play God to ourselves, and we try to mete out punishment and to not even forgive ourselves. God forgives. Through Christ we are forgiven, but sometimes we don't forgive ourselves. I had to pay a very high price on that in myself. But at any rate, the self-assertive desires unspin, and they unwind. And again, things are seen in reverse order. This is an exceedingly important thing, because normally, if we do things, we set out for an objective, and we do this, and maybe our plan gets deviated this way or that way, and we sometimes don't even obtain our objective. We obtain something else. I had a lot of plans in life that never came through. They were good plans, but they weren't as good as the unexpected. I don't try to plan too much anymore. Some things you have to, but when you see things from cause to consequence, that's one kind of experience. you get a totally different perspective if you can trace back from consequence to cause. This is the way intuitive thinkers do it. You intuit that something is true first, and then you backthink to where you are. Because if you try to go forward, this could mean this or this or this, and that could mean that or that or that. And the first thing you know, your thought is splayed out all over the place. But there is something much more certain when you know the consequence is directly and definitely and without a doubt connected to something that came before it. This does something to your consciousness that's really important. It gives a factual understanding, and it gives an experiential understanding that is, you can't get it any other way. This is why, like our spiritual exercises of retrospection, where you try to experience the last thing you did in the day, and you'll notice that if you're so tired and you can't keep awake, it's maybe because you were doing too much in the daytime and you weren't thinking about harvesting the experience of that day so it's available to you the next day. That's one I'm very guilty of. The very fact that you can't do the exercise well is in itself important. I'm tending to go astray here a little bit, and I guess I don't want to do that. The repulsive desires, because they are so repulsive, they usually, unless one is extremely hateful and still hangs on to them, repulsive desires break down pretty quickly. Another thing that happens in all of this, remember we said that when we come into birth or when we involve, we concentrate. From the desire world, everything gets expanded out to the extent of the universe, which in the desire world is much more than we understand here in the physical sense. This means that when we see things, we're looking from the outside in, and that always leads to objective consciousness. If you're subjective, if you're playing a game of chess and you're inside of it, you might not see it as well as the kibitzers on the outside. Or if you're watching the Olympics, you're on the outside, especially with that commentator there. He can take you back in slow motion. It's in that nice little square objective window. And it was called grandstand quarterbacking. When you're looking outward from the universal in toward the specific, you have a much, much more objective consciousness. So the experience of the desire world is such that with that universal viewpoint, you see things with a total moral objectivity. You're seeing it as the whole. But this means that you see things in a different way. If you dished it out when you were a subject, you felt how it was. I'm going to give it to that guy. I'm not going to let him get away with that. I'm not going to let him pull in front of me on the highway like that. I'm not going to let it. But on the other hand, when you experience it from the other point of view, and you're in a desperate place, you feel what it is like that somebody never gave you a break. So if you caused others pain, you feel it as they felt the pain. So it isn't just from consequence to cause. It isn't just seeing it from the universal big picture. You're seeing it from the opposite vantage point. And this is what literally neutralizes it. We make, in effect, we make little balls of desire. We spin them into existence. And it is this kind of psychological experience that unwinds them and neutralizes them. Oh, my goodness, we're at time. Do you mind if we hang on about 20 minutes yet? If you want to leave, please just go ahead and leave. But I want to at least get a little bit into some of the positive things. Yes?
I want to make a point. You were saying that one of the big similarities of the philosophy was that the same part of the desire world was called by different terms.
Yeah.
I don't think that's right. I think that all the worlds have 7 worlds.
Uh-huh.
Each one of those 7 worlds has 7 regions.
Uh-huh.
The borderland is a different region of the desire world, the purgatory.
Yeah, but it's a different...
It's still the desire world.
Yes.
But if I'm not mistaken, the borderland is region number 4.
Yes, but
purgatory is the denser region below that.
Oh, I thought I made that clear.
Not the same.
Yeah, I thought I made that clear. But what I was saying was equal to equal. I was saying that equals that the region of feeling, which is the 4th region, I'm saying that the different name for the same place is so that you can see it functionally in a different way and that you can focus in on it more. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sometimes not very clear. I don't know what to say. You've done wrong, you've done wrong. All right. When we have changed things in our lives, that is, suppose we had one of the best Rosicrucian students I ever knew in my life was at one time a pimp, a very hard, vicious pimp. And at the end of his life, he was so beautiful that he would cry at the hearing of hymns, and he was gentle and kind, and he had hundreds of people who looked to him and depended on him for help to understand their lives, mostly through astrology. He's from Detroit, and it's out of that Detroit center some really good people have come. I don't want to name names or anything like that, but it was in terms of intellectual understanding and in terms of living the teaching, and especially with regard to love, he's one of the best I've ever met. But the point I'm trying to make is that because he changed his nature, because his desires in life were different than what they were before, he doesn't have to go through a painful purgatory. If you remake and if you rebuild your desires, if you change, with the Rosicrucian philosophy, it's different than reading, this must be stopped, no, not quite. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. There are 4 R's in the Rosicrucian philosophy. You recognize what you have done. And when you do that, you remorse. Not guilt, but you remorse. Remorse is when you feel bad for having done bad or having done wrong. Guilt is when you indulge in remorse. You can indulge in remorse. No, it still didn't click. I thought I heard it click. What was your chair? Yeah. Dostoevsky talks a lot about guilt being frozen remorse. And when you have remorse, you repent. That means you don't do it anymore. And finally, after we have undone all of our baser desires, and after we have undergone our period of disinterest, if we were gray people, if we were feelingless people, then those desires or the fact of the lack thereof are impressed on the seed atom of the desire body. And from there, they will be something that give us in the future the feeling of, I don't want to do that again, but we still have to deal with the desire. Probably in the next life, we'll have to deal with the desire all over again, especially if we use a masking desire. A masking desire is when we refuse to feel a certain type of experience. Probably the people who least want to feel pain are heroin addicts. They can't stand to feel the pain. And so they, rather than feel the pain, they cover it or they mask it with heroin so that they don't feel the pain. Well, what happens in the desire world is not only do you have to feel the pain that you tried to avoid in the first place, but you also have to feel the pain of an unfulfilled desire because you can't get any heroin. And so there's nothing to attach yourself to. So anything that you are addicted to is like that in the desire world. And mind you, now this all takes everything here is very strange. Wherever we put our attention when we are in the physical, that when our body takes shape in the desire world, that will grow accordingly. Meaning to say, if a person is extremely lascivious, for example, in the desire world, in the purgatorial existence, their genitals will appear to be extremely large and extremely painful. The thing that Swedenborg, I think it was, described about a man who was an extreme liar and a very untrustworthy man because he put so much of his attention into his tongue. And he was a liar and a slanderer and a whole bunch of other things. Swedenborg says when you see him in the desire world, you get like a picture of a man holding a whole arm like hauling wood. He had tongue like that, and it was still dragging down. And you know how you catch yourself, when you lie, and then somebody catches you in a lie? And he described the man as stepping on his tongue from time to time. It's quite a fascinating phenomenon, but eventually it gets over with. Enough purgatory. Let's not make the talk about purgatory be purgatory itself. One other case I think we have to talk about, though, is suicides. Because suicides are a special case. If someone commits suicide before the will to live that would have kept them going, sometimes for hours, sometimes for years, in some cases even decades, that powerful energy from our divine being is still spinning. But it has nothing to grip onto. And as a consequence, the experience of that is, like when you're itching to get in and do something and you can't. It feels like a horrible, horrible pain. It is described in the Rosicrucian philosophy that for a suicide, there is an enormous internal pain that is indeed the will to live that set the archetype for the life spinning in the first place. Moreover, the pictures are still in the ethers of what they would have done. And things may not have turned out to be so disastrous altogether, and they can see that I didn't get a chance to do that. And here the Rosicrucian philosophy says is a special, really strong case, and that is they don't get anything out of those experiences that were never lived, even though they have to see them go by. If you haven't lived them out, there's nothing to retrieve from them. So the experience and the potential experience is completely lost. Moreover, everybody else, I'm sure everyone is here has been around a suicide at one time or another. Everybody feels guilty. Like, what could I have done to have helped that person? I had 3 people commit suicide in my life in a 3-month period, and that's always there. And from the other side, the person sees, I've let these people down, and these people are feeling, what could I have done? And so it's a really painful position for someone to be in, to have been in a suicide. In fact, the Rosicrucian philosophy goes so far as to say that in the next life they hang on to life almost really much, and they won't ever let go of life, and because they realize the effect. Yes, sir.
Does freedom of choice have anything to do with this?
What?
Freedom of choice, does it have anything to do with this?
Yes. Yes. You're free. In fact, we're so free that we can go against the way nature works. But our freedom of choice is not so strong, at least for most people, that it can change nature itself. So that these are going to be the effects if you, some people freely choose to do this, knowing that these are the kinds of consequences that are going to come down. Freedom, it's a funny thing, how to say it. Oh, I just want to pass because it's 15 after 3 already, and oh my goodness.
Concerning suicide also, is it important the irony that because the body numbs pain, not only do not escape,
Oh yeah.
Escaping, but it actually intensifies?
Yes. Yep. Everything is much, much stronger. All right, what happens after this is that after all the repulsive desires have unspun, naturally what happens are the positive desires unspin. The love we have given, the things we have attracted ourselves to, and this is pure, unmitigated joy. This is the higher desire world is called first heaven. And in this state, this nature, Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, it's a pity that we have to say of a human that it is a virtue that they avoided sin rather than that their virtues were all positive, doing good things. Well, in the desire world, the doing of positive good things are exceptionally reinforced. The reason being is that because there is more attraction and they are deeper in the spirit, they last longer. And so when we unspin those desires, it takes a longer time and they sink in and we feel them more strongly. Also, they are more subtle. And what is more subtle is more powerful. Steam is more powerful than a stone rolling down the hill, and thought is much, much more subtle and much, much more powerful than steam. And in the same way, the subtle desires of love and of sacrifice are much stronger, so that God isn't playing favorites and saying, oh, you're the goody-goody. Not at all. This is just the way nature is. The way nature is that the good is strengthened because that is the reality of things. That the attraction and the positivity and the sacrifice rather than the self-assertion is such that this has a more eternal, lasting effect. And because we're not so much distracted by pain, and because we have this longer, slower time, we do more help when we are in the first heaven. We're free to do other things. And this is important because this is where the question was, what happens to people and they're burned up like in a plane crash? Fire, as we know, we said the other day that you can take a seed and you can freeze it down to absolute zero and you can plant it and it'll grow. But if you put fire to it or heat it, it'll never grow again because that disperses and disintegrates the etheric body. So if somebody dies in a burst of flames, all the etheric records are lost. What happens is they come to birth, at least according to the Rosicrucian philosophy, they come to birth and they die as a child or as an infant. And when they die as an infant, because the desire body, or if the desire die as a child, the desire body hasn't been born. So it can't unspin yet because it hasn't been set into motion. And so what happens is that the spirit is taken into first heaven. And then the angels of destiny, the recording angels, they know what was lost in a previous life. And so what happens is that Child spirit, which is impressionable as a child is impressionable, is taken into various different kinds of atmospheres. And in those atmospheres, it can feel, like for example, it's possible to do this because you can do this as quick as a thought in the desire world. You can put somebody where there's a symphony being played and everybody's working together to produce a beautiful feeling in the air. And then you can take them where there's a street fight going on and there's all that vicious, savage stuff, and then take them right back to the symphony again, and that gets impressed on them, so that what they lost, in effect, it's much more elaborate, much more detailed than that, but in effect, what they lost by experience can be gained in between lives as childbirths, as child deaths. So that the claim is that whenever there is a war and many, many people die on a battlefront where there's all kinds of noise going on and bodies are burning and things like that, and if the bodies aren't burned, then there's a distraction from the noise of the war. That means when a lot of people die in a circumstance like that, that's going to mean a childhood plague, where later on many, many children are all going to die in the same period, and they're going to receive that kind of training. Finally, what happens is we unspin all of our desires. Some of the other things we do in the desire world, by the way, are we work together. In the first heaven, we don't work so much as individuals because there's so much attraction. We work together. One person described to me once an invisible helper experience where after they had done their work, they were allowed to participate in a painting class. And it was something like a paint by numbers, where you understood what the archetype was of the painting you were making, only you didn't paint with a brush. You painted with your consciousness. And this person described, wow, I got interested in what the person next to me was doing. He said, I screwed up the whole painting. Like I didn't, there must have been a bitter lesson to learn to not be working together, to not be cooperating and being collectively with each other. But at any rate, eventually we do our work there, and we leave only, our desire seed atom, our etheric seed atom, and our physical seed atom, then go with the spirit into the world of thought. And what happens is, because most people aren't familiar with doing a lot of thinking, and even if you are familiar, if you go into a deep concentration, you're trying to figure something out, and you're thinking on it and thinking on it, and everything seems really, really quiet. And this is described if you're in a world that you don't even normally perceive, that is, you don't normally think, or if you do think and the thoughts come hard at first, it's perceived as a silence. And then gradually, as you think more and more, answers start to come out. And pretty soon, you hear a note here, and pretty soon it's like, you're familiar with Prokofiev's, where he does this really jangling chord, then everything gets really silent, and then it's in the Romeo and Juliet, or the Romeo and Juliet suites, and then gradually everything comes out a little bit by a little bit, and it gets louder and louder and louder. It's something of that nature. It's like thinking. And then we are at a place where we are much more at home. We are thinking beings. Remember, we said that the mineral kingdom gives form to all of us, the animals, the plants, the humans, and that the plant kingdom gives life, and that the animal kingdom, each animal species is an entire temperament. It's a whole complex thought in itself, and that's what it gives to the desire world, while human beings give to the cosmos thought. And so what happens is we rethink all of the thoughts we have had in life. And we unthink them and we get back to the meaning. Yes? Yes. Yes. What is even more important is to be sensitive. Because if you had an interaction with someone and that person is experiencing that interaction in purgatory, if you can forgive, or if you can see from your point of view your part in that, that makes their purgatory much easier. What? Yes, yes, yes. The dead do interact with the living, but not in a vigorous way, because everything's on spinning. It's a very rare occasion that somebody who's unspinning that much can come back and actually do something here in the physical, because the work is altogether different. They're letting go rather than taking hold. But they will understand that. People who you are close to, if you have those kinds of interactions, and you'll sense it when somebody has passed on, and somebody that you've had really hammer and tong kinds of interactions, they'll come up in your consciousness. And if you see it with a different light, and if you let go of it, it lets go for them too. It's a very valuable, very helpful kind of thing to do. Yes, but they usually don't, because there's so much living in what's happening there that this is almost a distraction. You know, it's something ancillary to the when you're doing something that you're really into it and it's important, you do that. And it's like that in the inner worlds, that the whole world of reminiscence and remembrance and what we put out to people, that becomes so preoccupying that to spend a lot of time thinking what people are doing here it's ancillary. It's not a major thing. But there is nonetheless some interaction. Okay. With the rethinking, it's something like if you write a poem and you put, this is what I'm trying to say in this poem, then you give it to somebody else, and somebody else says, wow, this is what you said, and it wasn't what you consciously said, but they see something else that was unconsciously in it. It's something of that order that our thoughts, what we intended one thing by our thought, we couldn't see all of the perspectives, and when we rethink, we get a different meaning. And so we neutralize all of our thoughts. One thing that I want to mention, one more point, we're just about done, and that is we do work here also. In the second heaven, we do new thinking. We are almost like the forces of nature, and our participation is exceptionally important, because in the physical world, we are the only self-conscious beings in the physical world. And so we know from having lived in the outside of the material world, we know what works and what doesn't work. Therefore, when we're participating with the gods, and we are nature forces, and the changes that are taking place in the world are first made in thought, we are a very important component in bringing them about because of our self-conscious experience here. Even if we weren't scientists, or we weren't geologists or anything like that, we know that some things work and some things don't work, and that is very important. We have our service that we provide also. It's an exceptionally important thing that we do. In fact, some people believe that since so many people are incarnated right now, there are fewer people on the other side acting as nature forces to hold it all together with the self-consciousness of a human. And some people believe that that's why there are more cataclysms when there are more people incarnated, is because there are fewer people working on the inner world as nature spirits to be holding it all together. Finally, after all of our past experiences have been unwound, we go back into the spirit in what is called third heaven. And only to the extent that we can form ideas especially the idea of God or the idea of the whole creation, can we benefit there. But there is one thing that we do in third heaven, and that is a very spiritual term that is quite ancient, and it's called assimilation. It has the same root in it as similarity. Absorption is one thing. The essence of all the soul experience from all the phenomenal worlds does get absorbed as soul material into the spirit, which wakes it up and in effect feeds it. But this is done by a process of assimilation. That is, this experience is similar to this idea, and when we take the experience or the essence of the experience and attach it to the similar idea or find the original creative idea in the great dream, that is how this process is accomplished. So absorption and assimilation are two different things. It's just like in the body. We eat food, and the food gets digested, and it goes in the bloodstream, and it is absorbed into the bloodstream, but it is assimilated such that the heart takes only the oils and the fats, and the brain takes only the sugars. It takes the things that are similar to its needs. And the same thing is true in the spirit, that if we practice the idea, if we can understand how something is some experience is part of this general idea, like an idea of feeling or an idea of form, a mathematical idea, that is, the more we practice that, the more we can grow spiritually by taking the essence of all of our experiences and building them right into the spirit. I'm sorry we overstayed a half an hour again. I'll try harder next time to keep it down. Let's close with the Rosicrucian prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.